Have you ever needed to remove an object and thought, I need a fancy new AI feature to be able to clean up and remove a label like this on a box? Let me start by saying, you're not alone, right? But we actually have all the tools needed, even in the free version of DaVinci Resolve's Fusion page for high-end retouching. Today, you're gonna learn how to remove perspective to clone easier, how to improve performance in the Fusion page with the crop tool, and with Paint, there's this tool that's built into the Paint node that you probably never touched before. Welcome to my little painting masterclass. This 4K footage is available to download up on creativevideotips.com/thecuttingclub if you'd like to join in and follow along. All right, so the footage I've got today is this box of chili that I shot in my kitchen. Now, this is ACEScg and it's linear. It's ready to go for compositing, but we can't really see it good here on the display, now can we? Because it hasn't been tone mapped yet. So I will show you quickly on the color page to make this look normal on your display, add the ACES transform from your effects. We'll say the input transform is going to be ACEScg. So we'll go down here, ACEScg, and then my color display over here, when you get to grading, it'll be Rec 709, and the gamut compression will be reference gamut compress is quite all right. So on the edit page, if you ever want to see what it was like before effects or color, you can hit this button right here, or just hit Shift D is going to be your shortcut to like toggle that on and off. But before I go into Fusion, I do want to show you one thing, and that's that I typically like to duplicate my plates and comps before I go in there so I can see the original beforehand. So I'm going to make a duplicate of this by holding Option makes the copy, and Shift keeps it from going left to right. So I'll hold that down, and as I do that, you can see if I open up my timecode overlays over here, those haven't shifted at all. They're in unison. I'll disable the one below with D, and I'm gonna rename this one that's above so I can maintain and track versions easily. So in the inspector, I'm gonna open up my inspector, go to the File tab, down to the Name section, and the very end where it says the .exr and all that, I'm just gonna write _comp version 1. You may put your initials if you have a team of people working on stuff so you know who did that one. But I might also make it orange, and then we get into Fusion. So let's open up Fusion finally. Now when you open up Fusion, it does this default left to right layout. I don't think this is a good use of screen real estate. I don't think that's a word. But so I like to go to Workspace, Layout Presets, Fusion Presets, Midflow Vertical. You've probably seen this if you've seen me in my tutorials before. But on here, now we have a top-down approach. So we can better make use of a nice big display over here. So we're gonna get rid of this section over here. But when you first open this, you may see that this looks super dark like this. And that's because we actually need a view LUT in here as well. So the view LUT in here is not actually being applied to the footage. We're still working in this linear space, which is perfect. It's how the camera actually sees when it hits the sensor, and it makes it photorealistic. But to get this so that it looks normal to our eyes when we're working, we do add a view LUT, and that's what this button does here. And there's kind of two ways to deal with ACEScg in here. One is the OCIO display LUT. That's what I'm using, and I've got a tutorial that'll be linked on where to get this from, but it's basically you go download this file and you put it on your computer, the .ocio config file, and then you have it all available. So then you'll say your source space, just like we did on the color page. We'll say the source is ACEScg and my display is going to be sRGB. Now, the nice thing about this LUT right here, this OCIO version here, is we got this incredible amount of dynamic range, so we can really see the pixels much better. But there is another one in here if you don't want to go get this OCIO view LUT. There's one that's called just the standard built-in ACES transform as well. But when you open up the information for this, we don't get those gain gamma sliders. But the idea here is input is still ACEScg, output is sRGB, or whatever your computer GUI monitor is. All right, I'm going to go back to OCIO display for this case, and we will get started by first removing the perspective. So to flatten this box out, removing the perspective to make it easier to clone, the first tool we're going to be adding is Shift Space, the Perspective Positioner. So once that's added down into the flow, you'll notice if I flick this into the viewer and we look at the result, it goes cattywampus on it. And that's because it just gives some generic points on here. What I like to do is I actually like to look at the media in when I set this up originally. So I've loaded media in, you can see that up there, and we'll just take these corners and align these to the corners that are on the box. And once we do this, this will get us a nice rough starting point so that we can refine this. Now, this whole setup of removing, the distortion or the perspective that's on the footage, you want to do this as accurately as possible. So as soon as I have this roughed in, I do like to look at it. Once we do that, you can see it flattens everything out. And we want to make sure these lines here are like dead straight. Okay, that's clearly not dead straight, assuming you had straight lines in the original footage, right? This side's not too bad, but one tool that's on here that can kind of help that is there's a grid that's built in. So I'll just turn that on. I hit Command G, or it's probably Control G on a Windows machine, and you get this little faint line. It's like title safe lines and stuff like that. And this will just help me align it a little bit more precise here now that I've sort of flattened this out, where I'm going to be painting. So what I'll do is I'll take, let's see, I want to pull this down a little bit. So up is down, left is right. It's kind of like when you play those Call of Duty shooting games and you're old like me, you invert the sticks. I don't know if you do that, but I'm going to be taking this and just going up. That pulls that line down, and just kind of have some sort of a reference point of, you can see this yellow line that's right there. I'm going to kind of use this as a guide to sort of straighten things out. I'm going to do all corners the same way. You can use the keyboards when you start to get close. So if I come and start to pull this up, you can use up, down, left, right, and then you can get really precise. I'm going to speed up this section so you don't have to see me tediously line up the perspective positioner. So to zoom in, I'm just using middle mouse, left and right. All right, we have our box flattened out. So the inverse of this, to get this back to what the original footage looks like, we need another tool to basically do the inverse of this. And that tool is going to be called the Shift Space Corner Positioner. So corner positioner does the opposite of the perspective positioner, but how do we get access to the inverse values here? So we have top left, top right values. What I like to do and show is on the perspective positioner, we're gonna actually publish these values, these specific values that we had stretched that out. And the way you can do that is in the inspector, right click on the value and say publish. And we'll just do that with all of them. So top right, publish, right click, publish, and I'm right clicking on the word that says that value. So on the word bottom right, right clicking, saying publish. And now these values are going to be able to be connected to in a later node down here in my flow, which is going to be the corner positioner. So if I select my corner positioner now and I load that into the viewer, it doesn't have the values we want. In fact, it took it all off to the side. It did this weird default thing. But in the inspector, if I right click on the word top left, now I can say connect to perspective positioner, and it's the top left value, so I want to choose top left. And you'll just line all these up, and this is just a nice way to be able to go from one node that's anywhere else in the flow and make the connection. So we'll go top right there, bottom left, connect to perspective positioner, bottom left, bottom right, and we'll go to bottom right, right? So now if we take a look, we've put the image back together. So we've made this little sandwiched area in between that's flattened out that we can paint on. Pretty cool, right? But it gets better than this because we can actually increase our performance and when we do paint on this section here with a crop node and an uncropped node. So right now you'll see the resolution I'm working at is 3840 by 2160. It's float 16. That's hard for any computer. Even if you have a fast computer, once you start doing lots of effects, especially paint, the smaller resolution you have that you're actually working on, the faster things are going to render. You're going to be able to preview things and you just won't run out of RAM as fast. So what I'd like to do after the perspective positioner, I'm going to select that first so that when I add a node, it adds it directly in line in the node flow. I'm going to add shift space, the crop node is fantastic for this. So with the crop node selected, I'll load that into the viewer. There is a often overlooked, it was by me for a long time, this button over here in the upper left of the viewer. If you select this, now we have a way to dynamically draw on the screen of what we want to be actually cropping. So we're going to change the resolution with this crop tool. So I'll just grab somewhere from the upper left, draw a window on the section that I want to actually be working and painting on, which is just this top strip, because I'm going to remove this teaspoon or tablespoon serving label. And you can see we've cropped it to 3777 by only 547 pixels tall, this is much easier for the computer to render. So this is your performance boost. So we're going to work inside this crop area when we're painting for getting rid of this label. Just like before, if you take a look at this, we have an issue when we go back to the corner position. We have to undo this as well. So we're building like a little sandwich and then another sandwich inside that sandwich is a way to think of it. But there's not an uncrop tool or an uncrop button. So what you do is you take your crop tool, you hit Command C, that copies that node. Command V will paste it directly after it in the flow. And you can see I'm making this little gap in here. This is where our painting is going to happen. In the second crop, we can be clever about this, so we can rename this. If you want to rename, F2 is the shortcut, but maybe I'll just call this one uncrop. And in the uncrop tool, what we need to do is reset our size to the original footage resolution. So our original footage is 3840 by 2160. On the uncrop one, we need to do that. So I will just select it here, 3840, 2160. And then the offsets that are in here, we just need to do negative values of these, okay? Because we did a copy of it. So just put a negative in front of it. I hit tab to go to the next one, a negative there. And now when we uncrop it, it's basically stretching back out to there. So when we do the corner positioner, we have just this little patch here. And you can see, let's see, we don't need these grid lines on here anymore. So I'll hit Command G to get rid of those. But if you take a look at it's called the show DOD, we're only working on this small section. All right, so how do we stick this back on top and rebuild the whole thing? Well, we just take the corner positioner and merge this back on top of the original footage. Yellow's the background, green's the foreground. And now you can see I've just reassembled everything, and then this would go to media out. So we've just done all this work with removing the perspective and cropping the image just to get us back to where we started from, but we've created this nice little hole for our paint to live. So let's get on to adding our paint. I'm gonna hit Shift Space to type in PAINT. That'll place it right after the crop. That's where we want it. This is the guts of where all the work's gonna happen. I'll load that into the viewer, make sure it says paint up here. And the other thing to pay attention to with paint, it needs an input. Make sure you're feeding it the crop input, the scaled down one that's gonna perform really nice. And within the paint tool, if you're familiar with the paint tool, you've probably used brushes before. That's what this multi-stroke is, and there's a stroke over here. This is the one we'll use a lot of times when we're in here. But if we wanna make a big sections of pixels, and what I wanna do in this is I wanna get rid of this label here that says like 90 calories that's in the top right. So I need to make this up with other pixels that are available. And because of the shape of this is, this particular shot, this upper left corner over here might work really good over in the upper right corner to help me build that out. The basic painting tools that are available over here could totally do this, but there's a better, cleaner, faster way, and that's the point of this tutorial, and that's this copy rectangle button. So if you choose the copy rectangle button, it'll be white once you select it. The idea with how this works, it's really simple. You make a rectangle selection on what you want to get replaced, okay? So I'm going to replace this section of the label, and I'll just draw that out. Something like this should work fine. And then once you do that, you'll notice in the inspector, we have a source X and Y. And so this can be slid around, and what it's doing is it's sliding, it's a front source. So if you've heard of that in Flame, this is a front source. It's also called patch replacing sometimes, but we're just doing this in a very manual but precise way. Now the thing you'll notice when I did that, we have an issue. We need a mirror of this, right? So the left side, we need it to be flopped around. And in these controls, we have a flip left and right and up, down. You know what I'm saying. So I'm going to choose this horizontal flip button, and it gets us almost all the way there. I just need to slide it into position better. So that's what the source X and Y sliders are letting me do here. And this is all, you can change all this after the fact. These are just added as modifiers, and each one of these just acts as a single paint stroke, so they work really fast. If I zoom in here to this section and I want to get this lined up with more precision, hold Command on a Mac, and then you drag these number sliders, and you can have a lot more precision and control. On a Windows machine, it would be Control instead of Command, I believe. But you can see we're pretty close. That has done a lot with just one single paint stroke. Here on the edit page, if I go into presentation mode and enable and disable, That was like one paint stroke. That means it's going to work really, really fast. And you won't have to render and have all kinds of glitches because you run out of RAM. Let's get back to Fusion and finish cleaning this sucker up. So if I click on paint right now, you'll see, and I click off, there is a hard edge line over there. Two things we can do with this. We can patch, replace over, paint more over it, which we will do, but there's also a softness slider to this control as well. So see the softness right there? But it's hard to see with this green line. So I do want to bring up in the 3-dot menu up here, this options one, there's one called show controls. You disable that and that green line goes away, so that when you change the softness here, you can actually see the result of it quite a bit better. You just want to be careful not to go too far with it. And you also really need to pay attention to the idea that once you've disabled it to do more painting, you need to turn it back on. So go back to the 3-dot options menu and turn it back on, because you won't be able to paint with it off. And you'll forget that it's off and you'll think your resolve is broken. Just no, go turn your show controls back on. One thing I noticed though is if I click over here, I still have a bit of an edge that you can see, especially if you go back over here, you can kind of see that. So I might add another box there just to cover that up, like another copy rectangle. So these are stored as modifiers. That's just the first one. I can add another one. All you have to do is click over here, copy rectangle, and let's do another one to copy and cover up this bad hard edge that I had created. Maybe something like this. And this time I don't maybe need the flip button that's over here. So I can uncheck that and I can slide a different source in between there that's maybe nearby, but you get the idea. You can keep layering each of these one on top of the other until it looks like there's not even a line there. Or you can use the stroke controls, like the normal paintbrush controls, to clone and paint stuff out. So like, let's say we still have an issue here, obviously. This corner is good, but I have this backwards Texas over here that makes no sense. So I would add another one of these copy rectangle paint tools, whatever you want to call it, for this section right here. And then I would say source, and we'll find another section to fill that in, you know, something like that. And yes, we have like color differences that we need to manage and deal with, but you can see how quickly we went from having a big section there to using these rectangle boxes to fill in and paint with really clean lines that, you know, you can't do this perspective stuff unless you flatten it out. Now that we have a lot of this cleaned up, is we have a big section of gradient here that probably would be fine if I just moved that all over to the right. So let's clean that line up a little bit more with just another one of those boxes. Sometimes it's hard to see when you get too focused and looking at the details to see the bigger picture of where there may be issues and where those have come up. So always get like a different view on stuff, like take a different look. So I'm getting another one of these boxes here, so that I can just slide a different section over to fill this red that has some gradient mismatches. So I've got that set there. I'm going to move from this side over and maybe increase the softness of it a little bit, you know. And so I'm just trying to build that out. And then I will need to smudge this corner that's further away from camera to get that to really source. And actually, if I increase the softness now further on this one, it's actually doing a pretty bang up, believable job. So I'm at like a, I don't know, 0.2 or something on that one. So now if I look at edits, full screen, that's looking good. I need to adjust the top had that same issue, which is like right around here. So you can see in my modifiers, I just have a few rectangles. There hasn't been a whole lot that I've done to it. So it still should perform quite fast. So here I will select a different section. A lot of this is just about hiding stuff. That's what visual effects is, right? We're just trying to hide some issues that are with our work. And there we go. On, off. Getting pretty close. I noticed I introduced a new little issue in that upper right corner there. So this is a good opportunity to introduce the stroke tool in clone mode. So with the paint tool selected still, I'm going to clone mode, stroke controls. I'm going to choose what's called snap offset. And what snap offset, it just makes it a little bit sharper so we don't have the pixels when they copy and paste, they line up to the pixel grid. It's just supposed to make that a little bit nicer. I'm going to size this down by holding command and dragging left to get the right size that I need. And then to clone from other areas on here, I'm just going to option click on areas nearby. And that's going to basically be my copy and paste from section. And so I can come in here and try to get rid of, you know, this little bit of faint bit of yellow line. This is, in reality, this is very small on the image once it's composited back on. But I'll just try to do a quick cleanup so you can see how all of these land in the modifiers tab. So you can see it's technically 6 strokes. It adds the next one without even doing it. But you can see every time you release off the tablet or unclick your pen, then it makes a new stroke. And this is when paint gets pretty heavy, is when you start having lots of these. So you can see why just doing a few rectangles gets us pretty far and keeps the performance of the machine up pretty high. So now I've got that corner there cleaned out. So there you can see the result of the before and the after. Works pretty great. Now there's no tracking involved in this, so make sure to check out other tutorials I have on tracking. Now I would encourage you, especially if you've downloaded this shot, go ahead and do this other side of the box as well and practice removing the perspective with the perspective positioner as well, because this add all red pepper thing right here, this could potentially be a good cleanup option to move this red pepper up into this location. But if you don't remove the perspective first, it's going to be hard to get it to line up perfectly. So I'll do that in fast forward motion right now. But hopefully you got a lot out of this. Key points on the perspective positioner, publish these points and then connect them down in the corner positioner, which is the inverse of it. And then with the crop node, remember you got this drawing box that you can use and then duplicate it or copy and paste it, I guess I would say. And then just make sure you reset your size to the full resolution, 3040 by 2060, and just add a negative number to the X and Y offset to do the inverse. So the pixels go back to where they came from. Okay, we get that red pepper part fixed. One last thing I'll do is just basic paint strokes at the final end of this comp. And so after my final merge here, just do one more paint 3, and this one I'll use to, fix little scratches on the box, like maybe right here. And this could just be done with the stroke tool, set to clone, snap offset, but this obviously pays to get in there closer. Option click right there. So right here, option click, and you'll just kind of close up that torn corner of the box a little bit. Maybe we'll just close that up just a little bit more right there. You could do this for hours. This is Photoshop for video. Let's take a look at what we have before and after. So we've cleaned up this corner here. We got rid of that dust speck over there. And any of these other specks over here are really simple things to fix with just the normal clone stroke that you're probably familiar with. But hopefully that copy rectangle to build big sections, rebuild big sections, is going to be super handy for you in the future. Welcome if this is your first time here. My name is Chadwick. I'm a certified master trainer for DaVinci Resolve. And I would love to know what challenges that you have here in this massive editing software. And because there's so much more to learn, I'll see you in the next video.